Hey guys, it's Ross here and welcome back to flatpackfx. Now in this video I'm going to show you how to make this brush stroke effect. Now I've done this tutorial based on the same technique that Eric's used in one of his travel videos, and I've put a link to that breakdown video in the description below. So this is the original clip that I'm using here, and I've sourced this file from ArtGrid. Now if you want to source this same file, I've also put a link in the description below which will take you over to ArtGrid. And the thing I've been looking for in this particular clip is the clip can be moving, but I already have a mountain in the background. So I want to remove this mountain and then have the brush stroke appear over the top. Now, another way this technique works really well is when you have, say, a blank background. So say that mountain wasn't there to start with and you just had an empty spot, then you could add a mountain in digitally using this same technique. So I've started a new composition here and I've put my clip into this timeline. Now the first thing I need to do is remove that background. So for this, I'm going to use a couple of different techniques. Now the first that I can use, and what will most likely work for you as well, is that you could just come up here and use the roto brush. So what I want to do is I want to try and isolate the foreground elements in this shot, right? Now Roto Brush 2 is quite good at differentiating the edge lines here, as you can see, but you might find it easier to maybe isolate the background and then come up here and hit invert. So what I'm going to do is just play through this, and any areas where I can see it's not quite doing well, I can just readjust. Now I make regular After Effects tutorials just like this one, so if you're new here and you like this sort of content, then maybe consider subscribing. Now if I go back to my composition, we've got the finished roto brush. Now I can also add a little bit of feather on that, and I can also reduce the edge line here. So I'm just going to shift that edge very slightly just to reduce that. Add a little bit of feather on there as well. Now these edges are not quite perfect up here, right? So we can see that there's, it's not exactly what we want. So I want to try and use the Luma key to try and mask out this part here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that layer, I'm just going to duplicate it. So with my top layer selected, I'm going to come up to Effect, down to Obsolete, and I'm going to use the Luma key. Then I can select the brighter part and I'm going to start dragging up on this. Just going to turn off that bottom layer so we can see what we're doing. And I want to try and remove those little edges there. Now I'm not worried about all this bottom stuff. I'm just trying to focus on removing that top part. So that's just going to help. If I just show before and after, it's just going to take out those little bits of edge here that we couldn't get before. Now with that bottom layer, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the roto brush, and then I'm just going to draw a mask which sits basically on the edge as close as I can get it. And if your shot's moving, you're going to have to animate that mask. So I can just create a mask path keyframe, turn off that top layer just to speed this up and move this down. And I'm just going to roughly animate this so it sits over the top. Now I can also give this a little bit of a feather. And then when I turn that top layer back on, you can see that we've got essentially that clean edge there. It's basically brought all of that bottom layer back into our shot that we were missing, right? So we've ended up with the top that's been masked out, and we've basically got a clean plate of the bottom of our video. So the next part of this is we need to basically create a clean sky to go in the background. So what I'm going to do is just take these ones. I'm just going to basically come up to layer, down to pre-compose. I'm just going to name this one clean foreground and hit OK. So that's all basically in its own composition. I'm then just going to drag in another clean layer here of the video. And I'm going to take one of these frames here. So I want to take this part and I'm just going to create a freeze frame on that frame. And I'm just going to drag in here on this beginning part, because I just want to create one frame here at the very start. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to my clone stamp And I'm going to double click on my composition to open that up. And I want to start masking the sky downwards to paint this out. So I'm holding Option or Alt on my keyboard here. And I'm essentially just going to start painting the sky down into my shot here. Now you can go through here on the brushes panel. If yours isn't there, come up to window and make sure brushes is selected. And you can adjust all the different sizes and basically hardness and all of that sort of stuff here. But the idea is you want to basically just paint this out. So I'm trying to take what's above here and just paint this downwards. And I'm going to try and create a whole clean plate by taking this out here in the background. So something like that. If I just isolate that bottom layer here, you can see we've got that layer that's now basically like this. Then I'm going to take that layer, I'm going to come up to layer down to pre-compose. I'm just going to call this one clean background. I'm going to move all of that into a new composition. And then with that layer, what I'm also going to do is just go to time and then basically freeze frame that as well. That's going to freeze frame that for the entire length. So if you need to go through and cut anything out or adjust anything on this foreground layer, now is the time that you go through and readjust any of that stuff. So the next part of this is we now need to create basically the brush effect. So what we're going to be creating is a brush matte. So the matte means that you have black and white image and you're going to use that as a track matte to basically say, okay, anything that's white we want to keep, anything black we're going to remove. Now you could go online and just find an alpha matte that's already basically been created and then just buy that and basically drag and drop that straight in to skip this process. But this way I'm going to show you is actually how to create this from scratch in After Effects, and it's quite easy. And all we have to do is just basically come up here, we're just going to right click, create a new composition. And what I'm going to do is just make this a square composition. So I want 300 by 300. So something like this. And I'm just going to start by creating a solid. And I just want to make sure this is set to black. And then I'm just going to duplicate that layer. And to that top black solid, what I'm going to do is come up here and I want to add the fractal noise. So when I add that on, we get this sort of effect here. Now what we want to do is we basically want to drag up on the contrast. We want to adjust the brightness here. And the other thing we're going to also do is come down here and adjust the scale. Now the best way to see how this works is to firstly make it and then go through and adjust it in real time, and you'll see those changes happening. So once we've kind of got this, we need it really contrasty. Then I can come up here and what I'm going to do is just grab my ellipse tool and I'm just going to draw a mask which sort of sits around there. So I'm holding shift to kind of create a circular mask. I'm just going to add a little bit of feather on this, shrink that mask down a little bit here. And then what I want to do is over here next to modes, I want to adjust the mode. So if yours is not there, just toggle this switch here to bring up modes. And I want to change this to be stencil luma. Now, as soon as we do that, it removes the background, which is black, and it creates this image here, which is basically what we had before with all the black removed. Then I can create a new adjustment layer over the top. I can come up here to fill and just add a fill right on top here and make this white. So essentially what we're creating here is the brush head that we're going to use, but with the background removed. So what I want to do next is now create a new composition. I'm just going to call this one brush matte, and I want to make sure that this is the same settings that I had in my composition before. So for me, that's 1920 by 1080 here. And then I want to basically bring that comp one that we just created, which is that brush head, into that composition. And we want to use this to create a brush stroke. So what I can do is shrink this down very slightly, and I can just hit P on the keyboard to create a position keyframe here. And what I'm going to do is just start animating this in a brush sort of pattern here. So I can go through and adjust this afterwards, but I'm just kind of showing you exactly how this kind of works. So we kind of get this pattern happening like this. Now, if I take all those keyframes, come across here to easy ease, that's going to help smooth out that brush stroke pattern. And I can also adjust these keyframes here to make them more consistent by dragging them in and out. So that gets a bit more consistency. Now, to get the brush pattern or the stroke that's over the top, what I'm going to do is just right click, create a new adjustment layer. And we come up here and add what's called an echo. Now, an echo is basically like, if you know your motion graphics, it's basically like a repeater, but we use it for digital video layers. So here I'm going to change this to be maximum. And what I want to do is drop this right down to 0.0003. And then I can start dragging up on the echoes, and I'm holding shift here. And we end up with this brush stroke pattern here, kind of what we're after. Now, if yours is like this and there's not enough, then just drag up on the echoes and that'll just create the rest of that trail. So you might have to drag up on this quite a bit. Also, you can look at adjusting your time here. So I could also drop this down. That's also going to help with the number of echoes that you've got. The other thing that I've done here is also drag down on the starting intensity, and all that does is it basically makes it a little bit softer here at the start and then brings it up here at the end. So I can even drag up on this. So we just get basically a different intensity from the start to basically the end here. So now you can go through and actually adjust the pattern of the brush. So this is where I was talking about before, where we come back to that composition and make adjustments here. So just for instance, if I dragged up on this and went back to my brush layer, you can see it changes that brush in a different way. So I've personally found if you drag down on the scale and then down on the brightness, you kind of get more of a wispy sort of brush effect. So if you drag up on this, you can kind of get it to a point that it kind of looks more like a brush effect. Now for me, these are the settings that I used on my original composition. And I've dragged the scale right down, and I've also dragged down slightly on the brightness. And this is the effect that it's ended up with, right? So I end up with this effect of it sort of brushing in like this. The other thing that you can do is also adjust the scale. So if I hit S on the keyboard, I can adjust the scale of that brush, and that's going to help by filling in those gaps. So if I drag down, we end up with basically more gaps in between the lines. So you have to make the lines closer together. And if you drag up, you get more of that effect of it sort of filling those gaps. So once we've got that, what I'm going to do is bring that brush mat straight in here in the middle. And already that's in the right position for me, but you can move this layer around if you need it to basically sit in here, or however you need it to work in that position. The other thing I'm going to do is bring in my clean mountain layer. And I'm going to drag this underneath my brush mat. Right, so we've now got that clean basically layer in behind. Now keep in mind the sky is also included in that mountain shot, and that won't matter because the sky is going to be the same color. So when I use this effect, you're not going to notice that difference. So if you run into any issues where the sky is not lining up or anything like that, just cut the mountain out first so you've got an image of that mountain, and then use that as this layer in behind. And then with that layer, what I'm going to do is I need to come down to toggle modes to bring up the track matte settings. And I want to create a luma matte of that brush matte. And you can see that we've got that effect happening. So when I play through, we have that finished effect. Now, one other thing to note here is just here, you can see those brush strokes really clearly. So if you want more of that effect or less, this is where you'd come back to that, basically that brush, and you go over to your effects control, and you would basically scale up on the brightness if you want less. And if you want more, then you want to drag down on that effect. And that's going to create more or less of that sort of transparency layer. The other thing you can do, if you also don't want this sort of these wispy lines in here, you can see it kind of creates this stagger effect. that's because you probably haven't got enough echoes. So you can increase the number of echoes, or so if you want less of that, then basically just decrease this number. So it's going to create a more solid track map for you to work with. So there you go, that's how you make this brush stroke effect. Now, if you like this video, consider giving this video a thumbs up or a thumbs down. You can also check out videos similar to this one over here on the side of screen. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you in the next video.